Carla Atherton, Director of the Healthy Family Formula and host and producer of the Children's Health Summit 4. In response to the rapid rise in conditions such as autism, cancer, ADHD, GI distress, anxiety, depression, asthma, skin conditions, learning disabilities, and autoimmunity, the topic of this year's summit is preventing and reversing childhood chronic illness. And today I'm very excited to be interviewed by one of my brilliant Healthy Family Formula family health coach trainees, Dori Abbott. So please introduce yourself, Dori.
Hello, I am Dori Abbott, and I am excited to be here talking to the great and awesome Carla Atherton about these topics. My passion was education. I taught school. I was a principal, a guidance counselor, a librarian. I ran child development centers. I've just done all kinds of things in education, and I saw, of course, tens of thousands of kids go through those programs, and really saw a big difference between, let's say, 1983 when I started and today. Of course, had children of my own, and they're all grown, have grandchildren, and I see some really trends that concern me. And so I wanted to get Carla's take on some of this, especially as concerns addiction. My entrance into the alternative health world, I was always interested in, and I was always trying to find things out. But at 51, I was crashed down, had a health crash. I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk. I couldn't talk. I had multiple sclerosis, undiagnosed for 20 years, lesions on my brain, lesions on my spine, a couple mini strokes. I had mercury toxicity, a leaky gut, low vitamin D, just the perfect storm, high stress, type A personality. So I had the lovely opportunity from the universe to reinvent my entire life, which I did, became a ghostwriter and a researcher, and now trainee with Carla in her program. I work at Core Wellness in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we test bioenergetically for embedded viruses, bacteria, parasites, heavy metals, molds, and fungus, the 6 things that will take you out that nobody's really looking for. And it's just a joy to be here today and be able to talk to Carla.
I'm so excited to be interviewed by you. Because my trainees are the most brilliant people on the planet. They ask the best questions and challenge me every day. So I'm just so ready for this conversation. And Dori, your story, every time I just want to cry because I'm so proud of what you've done in your life. And so I'm really excited for this. So thanks for taking on this challenge of doing this interview with me. And I'm ready to go.
Thank you. Yes, I just came from the gym where I was involved in a kickboxing class, if you can believe that. The last 6 years have been a miraculous turnaround, one step at a time.
Yeah.
Simple, but not easy. But yeah, that's how that healing goes. It continues every single day. It's exciting. Mm-hmm. But I especially want to talk about addiction because I see this as so rampant, even in, what we call good families. I mean, I have patients who come in every single day who have addicted grown kids, addicted teenagers, to something, So I guess maybe, can I ask my first question?
Yes, please.
All right. When we talk about the word addiction, it seems like everybody's addicted to something. You have food addicts and, whatever. Digital addicts and whatever, but what is the true nature of addiction? How would you describe that?
Yeah, I have a lot of ways that I look at addiction, but I think really, in a conversation I had with Tommy Rosen the other day, he said addiction is something that you do over and over and over again, even though it hurts you and you don't want to do it. And I think that's a really apt definition. That's the definition, right, that we could go by. But the nature of addiction, like, why do we do that? Like, why do we do things over and over again that we know is not good for us, that is actually harming us? And it's sometimes, in the past, it's been looked at as something like we can't help it, right? Like it's a disease. And I wouldn't actually classify it as a disease. And so when we think of something as a disease, it's something that we can't help. And we actually can, because we're thinking beings. We have free will, we have choice, and it might be really hard, and especially if it's something you're biochemically addicted, like you have a dopamine hit that you're trying to get to, or you have a deficiency, or you're not thinking properly, right? Because of these issues that's like really clouding your judgment. So all of these things can be happening, but we still have choice. So why do we choose the things that hurt us? And so I think that part of the nature of addiction, of course, is the body. It's like, I think that that's one thing that we really miss, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But there's a basis in our biochemistry that can lead to addiction. But then that's not the only thing. It's about what the choices that we make, and it's in living in a culture of addiction, because this wasn't something people were, struggling with, 100 years ago. There weren't people addicted to food. There weren't people addicted to gaming, of course, because we didn't have this technology. There wasn't this like addicted to, social media, or like, gossip, or negative thinking, or maybe negative thinking. But I mean, it's not in the way that we see addiction these days. Like, this is a severe challenge that we're facing right now that we didn't have before. And so why are we making those choices? What is the nature of it? So, and I think it's, again, multifactorial. There's a biological aspect. There's something going on chemically, something going on nutritionally. But there's also this, like, the choices that we're making, the culture that we live in these days is actually an addicted culture. It breeds addiction like wildfire. And so I think that it's a matter of both, all of those things, and the spiritual aspect too. It's like, once we've lost that connection to our spiritual selves, I think it's very rare that you'll see someone who is spiritually aware and connected to some kind of source of, of spirit that is an addict. You just don't see that. You don't see that. You see more of a reverence.
True. And and connected to each other. We've lost that too.
Yes. And that's another thing, isolation, feeling like you're alone, and you're trying to get something. And I think so really what it comes down to, with whether it's like a spiritual thing, physiological thing, it's all about an emptiness, right? Something's missing that we're trying to achieve, whether it be, like, again, a nutrient we're not getting, like a chemical hit of dopamine in the brain, or if it's like, it's a camaraderie, connection, self-esteem. There's something missing that is trying to be filled, that the person who has an addiction is trying to fill. That's the true nature for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I have an 11-year-old grandson, so I'm keenly aware of this, but recently a lot of people have started, people in the know have started talking about digital dementia. Or digital addiction, with the symptoms of brain fog, lack of motivation, acting out behaviors. What's your take on the pervasive use of technology? How is it rewiring the matrix of children's brains and predisposing them for these addictions?
Well, I'm on my soapbox all day long with this. Like, I find that this is really concerning, especially since we see gaming or technology. I mean, it's a massively amazing tool. We wouldn't be able to do this right now, Dori, if we didn't have it. But it's a tool, and our children are not able to separate themselves from that tool and becoming really enslaved by the very tool that we think is actually beneficial. It's becoming actually a huge problem. So we'll talk about the rewiring of the brain first, right? So again, I alluded to this, or I mentioned this before, is that we get a dopamine hit every time that we play something that's stimulating to our central nervous system, right? And we get cortisol goes up, like all of, that fight, flight, freeze actually comes into play. It's like that sympathetic nervous system, turns on, right? Because when we're playing a game, or we're stimulated by blue lights, flashing, intense emotional play, where you're like zooming in on this particular thing that's going on digitally in front of you. You're getting a text, you're in an argument with somebody, in texting, or, you're replying to something political on Facebook, all of those things are creating this like just, you know, like it's like boosting this dopamine. So then you go off of it and you come away and you like go outside and you're like, you're pulled back, pulled back, pulled back. So our kids actually can't recognize that because obviously they're not in that emotional state, that state of development to really take those things and separate them and say, look, I need to get away from this. I need to self-regulate, because for one thing, if they're allowed to do that day in, day out, hours on end, they're not getting taught that that's important. They're not getting taught how to do that. And so it just becomes like, this is what I do and it's okay for me. But really, like what's happening is that we're rewiring. So as these children, our children are developing, their brains actually, like their brains are developing, okay? So for one thing, they don't necessarily have that ability to regulate, right? But they also are pruning parts of their brain that they're using a lot of. So they're like groove and groove and groove. And like, you know, you go down a track over and over again and you got these big grooves where the tires were. Well, every time you go over, that's worn more, worn more, worn more. And so that's where you kind of tend to fall in, is to that rut, right? And then, you know, less likely to go into this and that. And then you're not using, you're pruning away stuff that you're not really using. So that might be self-regulation, you know, and regulating your emotions, you know, moving to that frontal lobe, like moving to the, like where you can rest and digest, where you're using the parts of the brain that actually use logic and reasoning rather than going to the ooga booga limbic system, right? Which is like fight, flight, freeze. And so when those kids are in that state, where they're gaming, especially the interactive. And I talked to Dr. Victoria Dunkley about this to a great extent in our interview as well. But if you're in that state, you know, the stress is very high, and kids, like nobody actually, adults, whoever, cannot actually tell. Your body doesn't know if it's an actual person shooting you or you're shooting them, or, you know, this blood, gore, and all this stuff. They can't tell if that's not real. It doesn't know that. All it knows is this response of hormonal response, neurochemical response that's creating this whole groove that I was talking about that your kids are getting stuck in, right? So it's always in this fight, flight, and then sometimes freeze, sometimes faint, okay? So this is not conducive to a healthy, regulated nervous system. So you have stressed out kids. You have kids who have ADHD, you have kids who have, maybe they already have autism and it's contributing to those behavioral issues or to the neurochemicals that are not, you know, really behaving properly, you know, with the other issues that contribute to autism. You have kids, I'm seeing, you know, even autoimmunity, because we're combining that addictive behavior with EMF exposure that's damaging kids, you know, cells, right? Cells.
Yeah.
So a DNA,
electromagnetic trash, trash.
Like it's just, and I actually just finished interviewing Lloyd Burrell, you know, like an hour ago, talking about this for an hour. We barely scratched the surface. So yeah, okay. So this is the rewiring.
Oh yeah, he's amazing.
Our kids are developing these, not just habits where they are used to doing something and they want, you know, that becomes comfortable, but also rewiring their brains, creating a dysfunctional central nervous system, creating high stress that leads to all kinds of illness and all kinds of inflammation, and just from that stress response, and also a culture of addiction. So then we're teaching our kids, or our kids are learning that this is normal and that this is how they do everything, right? So we eat, you know, you know, we go, well, the gaming's not, you know, game like, you know, 8 hours a day. So then I'm also, you know, turning to things like drugs and alcohol. I'm not saying it's a cascade, but that all kind of goes together. Drugs and alcohol, you know, because it's a quick high, quick. It's like, we want it now. It's like, I just have to say one thing. I'm going to ask you, Dori. Remember movies, like, why is it that movies went in the 80s, okay, this is when I was like, you know, in my elementary years, in the 80s. And so you watch a movie that was made at that time and you think, man, this is slow. This is slow.
And quiet.
And like you gotta wait for stuff to happen. And, you know, and that's really what's happening with our brains, our children's brains. They don't know how to wait. You know, delayed gratification is a good thing. It's actually an indicator of like complete and regulated emotional health. That is essential. So we have this culture where everything's...
They're just staying limbic, is what you're saying.
Limbic.
Yeah, they're just staying limbic all the time.
Ooga booga.
Mm-hmm.
Ooga
That's
booga.
not a good place. That's not a good place to be in.
No. And then so this is what we have. We have addictions to other things, addictive behavior, addictive culture, you know, because we're like all used to this, you know, bing, 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 answer. Like, you know, this is actually changing how we live and be and breathe in this world. And that's significant. And I'm thinking some change is good and some change is not. Some change is progressive and some change takes away from this human existence. What does it mean to be human, right? Instead of, you know, actually out there experiencing it with this new this technology and this new huge issue that we are really having to face now. You know, it really affects, I suppose, like the happiness of our future generations, like really right down to their very health.
Yeah, I can see that. I know I have clients come in all the time, you know, whose kids are in this limbic state and they feel powerless really to get them out. But it, you know, when you start talking about addiction, they kind of roll their eyes. But I know there are other things besides technology and digital stuff that, you know, kids are getting addicted to. But the signs of addiction, you know, what would you say are some of the signs of addiction that parents and teachers, because as a teacher, I know I could see in kids things that, you know, I'm with them 8 hours a day, you know, but what should they be looking for in children and teens as far as signs of addiction?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's not just like, you know, a couple of things, but it's really like behavioral shifts and changes. I think, you know, we see like, and define, I think we really need to call a spade a spade. I think it's important for parents to be able to just go, this is an addiction, rather than like denying it and saying addiction means this, addiction's like a bum, and, you know, like rude things that, you know, like really, not rude, but like politically incorrect thinking about people on the streets, and, you know, like they're in the bar all the time and they're like losing their jobs and they're dropping out of, like, you know, life and all that. It doesn't have to look like that. And addiction, our kids a lot are addicted. And I mean like to sugar, to gaming, to, you know, social media. Like we have a brand new ball game that we're dealing with right now, and it's more insidious because we don't want to call a spade a spade. But we need to look at this, because the only way to look at it is to just get hard-nosed and go, look, that my child's brain is developing right now. Do I want them to have a future of crutch to crutch to crutch, instant gratification, emotional irregulation, or do I want them to live a full, happy, wonderful life, caring for themselves, others, and their planet? So this is the question I just wanted to put out to parents. So the signs are when your kids are actually, I mean, when do you know that this is part of their growth? Okay, so that like teenage people tend to sort of like explain away emotional irregulation and, you know, impulsivity and rebellion, and, you know, to, you know, going with their peer tribes rather than their family tribe that they always return to later. You know, that people think that that's kind of like the normal thing that happens in teen years, and to some degree it is. But if you see your child is like overly, like if it's like night and day, right? Like, you know, you're thinking, well, what happened here? Like, why do we have so much strife in our house? Like that kid is, well, for one thing, they should not be playing for, you know, if they're gaming an hour, 2 hours, 3. I mean, like an hour actually is quite a lot a day. Like I don't even know if I would be thinking enough, like that would be excessive for me, because there's so many other things to do in life. You know, there's so many other things. And what is it doing for you or for your child? A little bit of like, that's the problem with us thinking we should be entertained all the time. It's like, why do we need to be entertained? Like that's like every blue moon when you're just like, you know what? I like movies. They move me. They make me feel this and that. And I learn from them if I'm watching these certain things. Okay, fine. But for something that you're doing like to pass the time, it's something that your kid's doing as soon as they get home from school. They got to hook up, put on their wireless headset and talk to some kids that aren't even there. Like that, to me, that's just like,
right.
Those relationships, even those relationships
every day,
develop every day. And those relationships between those kids mean less because they don't actually have experiences together outside of this virtual world. So they're actually being robbed of these real experiences with their friends, with people who can learn to care about them. They're basing, like, so these relationships, even those relationships they think that they are developing there, or they're dependent on, they don't really exist. So so that's one thing. So gaming, excessive gaming, or well, obviously if they're coming home smelling like booze or pot, if they like staying up all late, if they're out late, if they're going to parties, I grew up in a group of people who did a lot of that. Okay, so I was both part of the I don't know, the kind of sickness of it all, but also trying to help take care of all those people who were doing this. I would say most of those people were addicted. And weekend warrior, that's addiction. I see that. Because I think it actually it's detrimental to the rest of their lives. Some kids were, we'd have jobs, and some of them would miss their jobs, or they wouldn't really care, or else they would go, but they would still, have other things like relationship problems or stuff like that as a result of what they were doing. So they knew, these kids, they know it's not good, but they do it anyway, right? And then hiding in their rooms. Like, some kids aren't partiers, some kids aren't drinking, drugging. They don't have but all of them across the board tend to have some kind of personality shift, right? Like something going on with them that we are labeling as mental health issues. So emotional and mental health dysregulation, right? So, some of these kids can present these diagnoses that we're getting as ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, right? They're not going to cooperate. They're not going to do that. They're not going to. They're slipping up in school. They don't care about apathy. Huge, especially when it comes to you might see up and down emotional stuff when you have those things they're actually taking in sugar, alcohol, and drugs. But if you are seeing apathy, so many times it's technology. So many times that's what that is. They don't care. They don't give a crap.
Right.
And it's not that child that doesn't give a crap.
So true.
And so if you see, and one thing I really want to alert parents to is, if you see, just observe your child after they play video games, hour, 2 hours, whatever, after they're done their stint or whatever, see what it's like. So actually, for one thing, they might not be done. You might say supper and they're not coming. Supper, they're not coming. They're not, all fine, just eating.
Right.
Or whatever. They won't come. They don't care. It's like a trance.
They're almost feral, Yeah, they're almost feral, like a feral cat, or something.
Well,
they just want to eat in front of it, and they want to.
Yes, they can be, definitely. And some kids will fight to the death to get that back. If you see that, if you say, okay, look, that's enough, and we're going to have to put it away, we'd have to make boundaries. It's not about controlling that child. It's about helping that child control themselves, right? So that's what they really need to understand. And so if you're saying, okay, look, this is a boundary we have, and if they're freaking out, throwing stuff, or swearing at you, or I've seen that, you see that all the time. That is an indicator that this is an addiction, or an addictive. So even if we don't want to say an addictive behavior, they're exhibiting addictive behaviors. So anything like that seems out of the ordinary, parents know. They know. If you're they know if something's going on with their kids. And if those kids that are really good at covering stuff up, you still know, because you know how good they are at that. And you feel it. And so
right.
Your instincts. And if you don't want to label it as addiction, take them to some counselor, whatever, you still can do something about it, even if you don't want to go there and say, my kid's an addict. You could say, it's too much, right? This is just too much. We need to change things.
Right. And that comes down to the parents really paying attention. And unfortunately, a lot of them are addicted. So everybody's on their own devices, or, watching TV or whatever. But I know there are other things, what I've had experience with kids, migraine medication, pain pills missing from the cabinet. Of course, one of my youngest son went to school where his dad lived, and it was a very high achieving, very wealthy neighborhood. And it was different than what he was used to, but they were just, the Adderall was just, that was just a common thing that everybody took before they took their AP exams, and that kind of thing. And it was just their reality. But once this shows up, how should parents deal with it? I mean, what's kind of a protocol for dealing with it?
Sorry. As you know, like you can probably hear this, Dori and I, we have a little bit of a delay. So excuse us if it sounds like we're cutting each other off. But I just want to say, before we go into like any sort of protocol or whatever, actually what I would like to say is the areas that I always look into when I'm thinking about addiction and helping, someone through this, would be what you talked about, medication. So being addicted to medications, I actually think that is actually really apt and a very wise thing to bring up, Dori, because I think that with our culture, right, of addiction, another way that we're perpetuating this addictive behavior or thought process is a pill for every ill. It's like that medicalization of our health. Mm-hmm. So, right, so we think, again, quick fix, we get rid of the symptoms and we're going to be all good and we would just live however we want because we deserve to eat a bunch of junk and we just want to do this and we want to do that and, we're entitled to it. But really, like, a pill for an ill is teaching our kids to actually be addicted to prescriptions. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to be chemically addicted to, like, like opiates or whatever. We're hearing all about opiates in mainstream media even now. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could, like you were saying, Adderall. It could be like, I'm addicted to some kind of speed, just so I can stay alert. I mean, even an addiction to coffee, like that's a major addiction that people turn a blind eye.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're burning out their adrenals because what they need is some bloody sleep, get off the blue lights before 8 o'clock, get some actual rejuvenative sleep, and maybe you will feel more energized in the morning. Eat a better breakfast, right? So that's part of the protocol. But I'm thinking, so one main thing I think is medicalization of our health and saying that we're just going to take that. We're going to just drive the car as fast as we want. But then, we're just going to do the Band-Aid, do the paint job over the rust. That's not going to work because eventually that rust is going to show through and the car's going to fall apart, So, so that kind of leads me to, so we get used to, covering stuff up. And then there's this medication of kids who have these, exhibiting these issues, exhibiting these behaviors that actually are, they're missing the mark, right? And they're being medicated for like a lifetime, leading to all kinds of other problems that can happen as side effects, and not getting to the cause. And really, if you get to the cause, and this is if you want to talk about protocol, if you get to the cause, you cut off the whole desire and reason to do that behavior in the first place. They don't want to, because my goal is never to create a dry drunk, a dry, addict, a dry, someone who's like abstaining from what their addictive behavior is, gambling, gaming, whatever, all those things, food, sex, whatever, all of those things. I don't want people to be abstaining, but still wanting to do it. That's a dry drug. That's like, you still have those emotional problems. You still have the struggle. You still have, I wish, I want to, no mindset change. I want people to be, and especially our children, to not even want to do it in the first place. Not even need to do it in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So
well, that's the $1 million question,
Yeah.
how do we prevent it? But first, before we go on to that, when you're talking about medicalization, one thing that I've seen so much of is kids are so anxious and they're being prescribed these heavy duty, benzos, Xanax or lorazepam or whatever, Ativan, they're being prescribed these on a regular basis in high school, especially. And, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I would see, every class had one anxious student maybe, and you knew you had to take special, you treat them with kid gloves, treat them carefully because they were just fragile. But now it's like you teach a class of 30 kids and it's dominated by kids on some kind of psych meds.
Yeah.
And, there's got to be a better alternative for rampant anxiety, than this.
Well, let me tell you, there is. And
So I'm hoping you'll tell me that.
Well, that'll lead us back to that protocol that you're asking me to explain, right? So, I mean, again, like, protocol is just a word that we use, but it's not real. There's no really a protocol. There's really like, major issues to actually pay attention to, and then you deal with each of those things, right? Because it's a multifactorial approach. It's not just, again, like when we're doing like a pill for an ill, we're doing benzos for like, if we're to deal with anxiety, we're Ritalin to deal with ADHD. Like that's not addressing the cause. So the first thing I always do is, let's say that child's addicted, that child has anxiety, and often those two things go together. Depression and addiction go together as well. So because they're one and the same. And so the actual, like, when we look at the root cause of that particular behavior or that particular, like, I guess, mental or mood disorder, that's when we get, that's when the rubber meets the road. Sorry. It's like, I'm losing my words for that. But that's when the rubber meets the road. So if we look to things like the body, right? So what are we missing? So if, like, let's take anxiety, for instance, because anxiety can actually be the catalyst for a lot of addictive behaviors as well, because that child's anxious, they're looking for a reprieve, because everybody just wants to feel good. And that's okay. I think we should want that. We are, feel good seekers. We don't want to feel bad. We don't want to feel, like grumpy, cranky, whatever. We want to feel good, so that we're always seeking that high of life, right? Which is exactly what we should be doing. But how are we doing that? And what do we expect out of it? And being able to ride through that stuff is not so good, but because we know we're actually strengthening character, right? But okay, so let's take anxiety, your example of anxiety. So we look to these, like I said, biochemical, issues, like what's going on with that child as far as their physical health goes. So we've got, like, are they getting enough sleep? So like that's a huge contributor to all kinds of emotional issues, all kinds of mental health issues. You do all your repairing when you sleep. You do all your brain actually cleans itself through the lymphatic system while you sleep. So you get rid of all the toxins in the brain at that time. If you're not getting enough sleep, that doesn't happen. If you don't get the proper sleep at the proper time, your circadian rhythm is off, and you need that whole rhythm of cortisol going down when you sleep, and then gradually rising just before you get up, and then rising a little bit still, and then going down toward the end of the day. That keeps everything in check. Your hormones are tickety-boo when you have that rhythm going, that natural sleep-wake cycle. Because if you know what that's like, everybody knows, don't have a good one night of sleep will set you off. Like, that day sucks. It sucks, and there's a reason for that. I mean, just think about it. Oh, there's actually a reason why I feel so terrible after I don't get enough sleep. There's a reason. So I think that's like taking care of the basics, the physical basics. So sleep, and rest. Rest isn't sleep. Rest is just taking a chill. And when we are, like, filling ourselves with all these addictions all the time, expecting a quick result all the time, we lose that capacity to just rest and digest. Like, just to chill out and be, not do all the time, not fill up our brains. Like, it's like, like lights in our face all the time. Like that. Like, if someone's doing this to you, like, you just want to smack them, And that's how people end up feeling in their life. Right? And then there's that tendency to want to numb. So you've got other kinds of addictions that come along with this stuff, and they don't know how to self-regulate, like I said. So then we've got that sleep, rest. We got, like, of course, nutrition. Okay. That's going to create a whole lot of anxiety if you don't have the proper nutrition. And I could go on for, like, hours about this, because we could go on the ins and outs of this nutrient and that nutrient, but really, like, minerals are depleted. If we don't have enough magnesium, that is one of the major nutrients when you're talking about anxiety, is having low magnesium. I don't even know the percentage, but it's an extremely high percentage of our population is low in magnesium. We need that mineral for good health. It's the chillax mineral, right? It will allow. So if you're
and amino acids.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's like, it is so like kids with magnesium deficiencies, that's one of the first things I do. Take some magnesium to bowel tolerance. It's so easy and it's not going to hurt you. Like it's you need magnesium. People think calcium is really important. Actually, magnesium, we need magnesium even more so. And of course, in conjunction with calcium, right? To build bones and all those things. But for mental health, and often our kids are low in GABA. Like they're screwed up because of that sleep-wake cycle screwed up. Their cortisol is high. Their sex hormones are affected by that. And their neurochemicals are all messed up because they're getting this whole mess of stress. So, so a lot of kids end up with like low GABA. So their brains aren't, and actually, GABA is actually affected by, it'll turn into glutamate rather than GABA when you have a high sugar diet. So we're on the sugar roller coaster, and it's not just blood sugar that's creating highs, and then when there's lows, both of those things can cause anxiety. Because for one thing, the body thinks like, what? And it's like got too much sugar, and it's pumping out all this insulin. That's damaging enough as it is. It's also damaging to the brain. But when that goes down and there's a sugar crash and you go too low, that body, your child's body feels like, I'm starving, I'm freaking out, I'm gonna do anything I can. That's like a high anxiety state, right? And then, okay, so we've got these physical things. Lack of exercise. Exercise is actually the number one, like not number one, but that's the only actual, like we have proof for a lot of other things, but the one thing that is like definitively proven to reduce incidence of depression, like to actually elevate mood within minutes, actually, of doing exercise. So good on you for boxing today, because I bet you felt good after that. Tired and beat up, but felt pretty happy, right? So so there are all these different things going on in the chemistry of your body, that if you're eating, sleeping, breathing right, you're not stress breathing through your mouth, you're like, and if those children, they know how to self-regulate, meditation, right, is one of the ways to teach people how to access themselves, be with themselves, to slip into that parasympathetic nervous system rather than the sympathetic fight or flight. And also I think there's one more thing that I wanted to mention about that. Oh, the protocol. So that's my basic approach. I go for all of those physical things first, because that's what we're missing. We think that we just stop and we cut things off and we get them out of this environment, which is what we need to do. Yeah, of course we do. We're not going to go to a bar with an alcoholic. We get rid of the booze. We don't go to the bar anymore. We maybe, shift, people we're hanging out with. Yep. We need to do all that stuff that we've traditionally been doing in conventional, methods of treating addiction. But I think that, we're missing the physical causal factors, because they always go with hand in hand with all of that other stuff, the social, the emotional, I guess the spiritual, right? Like community, all that stuff, all those things go together, but we're always missing that physical stuff. That's why it's just like makes me crazy when I know that people are going to like a 12-step program and they're serving donuts and coffee.
No! I know. Let's just switch that addiction to sugar, right? Yes.
No.
Well, I know with kids, they eat what I call the beige diet. Everything is beige. It's Honey Nut Cheerios in the morning and chicken nuggets for lunch. And, they might have popcorn or chips or French fries, fish sticks. They're all beige. There's no color to any of it. And so, I tell parents all the time, like, they have to eat the rainbow. But I think what you're saying, those micronutrients, they really make a difference.
They do. And, I want to say one more thing about that, because you're saying that, like, when you mentioned the cereal, it made me think about, like, things like toxicity as well, because that's another causal factor. And anxiety, too. Like, kids can have, like, a toxic overload from things like, they're eating in their cereal, because there's glyphosate just dripping from those breakfast cereals, especially cheese. Like inorganic food, like, I mean, these things, like, you think, oh, really, am I going to buy organic now? Yeah, actually, yeah. And that will contribute to anxiety if you have a toxic overload. I mean, if you think about it, the brain, okay? This is all happening in the brain. So what do we want? Of course, toxicity is going to affect, you know, what's happening in there. And also, you know, infection is another thing that can lead to anxiety. Also, you know, like, and parasites, and nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. But they will wreak havoc as well, causing all of these chemical processes that I was just talking about in the body. So those are like sort of the horsemen. Like, so one of my speakers talked about the 4 horsemen, you know, and so we're always looking at like toxicity, infection, and we want to know if there's anything that's happening that's creating any sort of inflammation. And if there's inflammation all over the body, there's sure could be inflammation in the brain. So, yeah. So I just wanted to add that, Dori. Okay, I'll let you ask your next question. Sorry.
Oh no, this is great. This is, you know, I know that you do a lot of work with neural inflammation, like with strep A and that kind of thing. And since I've been testing, I see a lot of that with kids that are carrying that strep embedded virus, you know, bacteria and viruses. If you are the parent of an addicted teen or grown child, this is the thing too that we don't talk about, because there's this whole 20s thing where a lot of kids are still living at home, or even in their 30s after they've been divorced, they come back home, and that's a whole, you know, social psychological thing. But you know, many times they are addicted. They won't keep a job, you know, they or can't keep a job. They won't give up whatever it is, you know, video games, pornography, benzos, you know, food, whatever it is that is creating the feel-good feeling. But what is a parent to do if that grown child, or if that teen, or even that 11-year-old is unwilling, is hostile to and won't change, won't eat, you know, just will spit the good food out or whatever? I mean, what is, you know, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, that's hard. I mean, that varies from child to child, family to family, dynamics, all that stuff. And, you know, I was once told, like, well, that won't happen if you have if you do X, Y, Z, if you've got this particular relationship with your child. And that's not even true, actually. I mean, for the most part,
no.
But really, like, you know, there are special circumstances where even the parent that had the best relationship with their child still lost them to some extent.
Yes.
Some kind of external issue arose, and that, you know, that could be anything. I mean, it could be like we were talking about physical stuff, like maybe an infection. And I mean, if you have kids with pandas and pans, and they're not thinking clearly, and so a lot of these kids have anorexia. We think that's an addiction, or you know, in that addiction spectrum of doing something that's harming you over and over and over again, and knowing it's harming you, but not really being able to stop.
Right.
So anorexia falls in that category, but this is not something that they can logically talk themselves out of. This is actually created by infection that causes a neurological autoimmunity. Like, so brain, like your body's attacking its own brain tissue due to infection, right? Sometimes those kids are not thinking clearly, or they have something like my daughter has is type 1 diabetes, right? So if your blood sugar is up, low, high, low, not thinking clearly. Same thing with kids who have sugar addiction. And we don't necessarily have to have a bad relationship with our kids for our kids to start eating sugar. We just maybe didn't know, or maybe they're out at school and they have lunch at school every day, and that's fed there. Maybe that kid went to their neighbors to play video games and they got addicted to them over there, which is happened in my family. And so, you know, you could have no TV, you could eat organic yourself. So this can still happen, right? But I'm not saying that that's like you have no control, right? Because again, laying the foundation as a parent, and when they're in your home, what are you doing when they're home? And I think that is really, really, I think that's the most effective thing. We can't avoid everything, but I think with our little kids, we can. I mean, for the most part, we have more control over that situation. I don't mean over our kids. I mean control to influence our children in a healthful way, so they can make good decisions for themselves when they're in their home. But I think that's somewhere we really start. So with the little guys, you know, when you're saying someone's spitting out their food, right? Well, it will end. It will. Let's say their problem is sugar, okay, and they're like, no, I don't like it. I don't like it. It's like so annoying. I mean, I I love little kids, but sometimes I'm just like my niece or nephew. I'm like, you don't like it. I just spent the hour making it, So yeah, but
right,
they're
right.
spitting it out. They're being defiant, whatever, or you're just kind of getting used to a new rule, like
Or their gut biome. Yeah.
yeah. Yes, and so we're getting rid of like used to a new rule. Okay, well, look, like I think that it hasn't been very good for us to not eat at the table together. We're gonna start doing that. Like I would really like to talk to you at that time of day.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody's like, nah, nah. But most of the time, if there's not a big issue like we're talking about pandas or like huge blood sugar roller coaster or whatever, it's usually not. It doesn't take long to change that because then they feel better. So at first they don't feel better. At first they feel like they want what they want and they're going to be defiant. But I mean, they're not going to starve. I mean, they will not refuse to eat unless they've got something bigger going on. If they have something bigger going on, you deal with that. So if they've got toxicity, if they've got infection, those things, or blood sugar, candida, for sure. You deal with those underlying causes and then it gets easier. It really does. And I know at that point too, how do you deal with that? If they're spitting out supplements, they won't take them, like stuff like that. So you have to be very creative.
Right.
I've done all kinds of things like, well, if they won't take a magnesium like supplement, then we just rub a little bit in their lotion. Like with the lotion, you can do transdermal. You can do baths. You can do it like in a glass of water that kind of makes like a fizzy,
Epsom salts.
Yeah, Epsom salts. There are ways to do it, and eventually and there's always something that they'll like. Some kids really like the smell of essential oils. Some kids don't. Some kids. So there's always a way to do it that works for your child and the age that your child's at. If you have a defiant teenager, that's another thing. The connection is really, really important, between you and your children, and listening is probably more important than you telling them. So what's going on? Like they need to have this enough education to really be on board with what you're telling them. Or even if they're not on board, if you say, okay, look, I get it. You want to make your own decisions, but I'm seeing something going on here. And let's just, I'm making this call. Because, I'm your mom and I'm pretty sure this is an issue. So, it comes to those points where I feel like that's what parents need to do. And I think most of our kids, I really actually can't think of any that if you're loving in your intent, you're not punishing, never, ever, ever take something like this away that they're addicted to as a punishment. That's the worst thing to do because then they see it, and then that's a power struggle, right? So if it's done in a loving way, with understanding, with filling up their cups with something else, you're going out, you're spending time with them, you're visiting with them, you're taking them to things, exposing them to things that are better for them, that they actually like, right? Then I think that they need that. They want that. They want you to help them to get out of this sort of loop that they found themselves in, because again, they know it's not good for them. They don't necessarily feel good, right? So I think that those things are really helpful when you have kids who are oppositional. And again, like I said, when it will pass. It will actually, and it literally takes like a few days if you're consistent, and if you don't waver and go, oh, okay, you can play that for a few hours today because I'm busy, because sometimes that happens. You're like, it's really a lot easier not to do this right now.
Yeah.
So in a loving way. So it's hard. It can be very challenging. So us parents, we have to look in and really nurture ourselves, find out where our addictions lie, what our behaviors are that are not conducive to our own health, leading by example. It's a big job, parenting. But I think that's another way to keep ourselves centered so that they have that model, that role model. And then we're kind of like leading the way for them as well.
Yeah, that is golden. I mean, that you really answered my last question, which was, prevention's obviously better than having remediation. And how do you equip your kids to be resilient in the face of stress. I remember my last son, I was quite a bit older when I had him than I was the first one, and the second one. But he was always prone to danger and jumping in the pool, so I taught him to swim at 2 years old because I thought this is the best way to prevent him having a pool accident is to teach him how to deal with the water, how to swim, and it did work well. But what the things you're saying are kind of this preventative type situation with kids and keeping them from addiction. But I guess for young parents, sometimes it's overwhelming that the pushback that you get. I know with my kids, I did that every night. We ate together, and of course, a lot of cell phones didn't come in until later. But still, even when we have holidays, it's no, don't bring it to the table. You're grown, but this is how we're doing this. But there was a lot of pushback, and always, I always felt like I was losing the battle. But now, that they're all grown and have families of their own, their remembrance of it is, well, that's just the way we did things. They don't remember, the pushback, the arguments, the, stress that was created with me trying to change and hold the line, I guess, and so I think parents should be encouraged that it won't, in hindsight, this will look very different in the rearview mirror.
I love that you did that. That's so metaphorical, actually, about teaching your child how to swim, because he's like, you can't always prevent what's going to happen, but you can actually give them the tools to deal with whatever that is. I love that. That's so beautiful.
Right.
Yeah. I think, so prevention, is obviously the best, or equipping them. There's going to be slip ups. There's going to be times where you're like, wow, what happened? What changed? Challenges. But I think, I remember when my kids were young, we didn't have a TV even. Like, we just didn't. Like, and a lot of those things, the decisions that we make, I think we let our parent guilt take over, because we're just as much affected by all of this advertising and what we should do and how we make our kids happy. And, we're depriving them if they don't buy them Lucky Charms or something like that. And it's like, well, no, we're not. And so if we understand that, we're like not going to be duped into like believing something that's, worshiping a false god, let's say, then we're more strong in that. And it doesn't have to be a push-pull. It's just like, nah, we don't have that. We don't buy that, right? Like, we don't have to have sugar addicted children, because we buy the groceries. Like, we buy the groceries. So it's not like we're not hiding stuff in the closet for ourselves to eat when our kids are in bed. Like, all that stuff is just like, I think, it's really important to keep that in mind, that we have the power and the empowerment. And if we're really clear on the outcomes we want, and that what, our values are in our families, what we do and don't do, we have house rules, that kind of thing, because that is for the betterment of all of us. And so it's not like, oh, you can't, before dinner, like, or before whatever, everybody chucks their phone in this basket or whatever and puts it on an airplane, and just stuff like that, just things that we just are practice. This is what we do. That's just what we do. So, yeah.
Well, gosh, that has been so enlightening. I appreciate your answers to all my questions. It's a lot.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions?
It's a lot, but it all makes sense.
Yeah.
It all makes sense. It really does. It's amazing. I guess the last one is because you talk about parents, the guilt and, that we have our own addictions or whatever, but why, what areas are we turning a blind eye to when it comes to addiction in children? Like, what are we missing?
Well, yeah, I think really coming back to that whole thing of, what the causal factors are, what is causing this, what's feeling empty for that child or that teenager, and how do we get them, help them to fill that up for themselves. So I think that's missing. I think another thing that we're missing is that this is important. It's not just benign, eating, like being addicted to sugar, being addicted to all these new addictions, gaming, technology, like this whole culture of addiction. I think we're not really paying attention to that, because we're all looking for like, oh, the opiate the opiate crisis, and oh my gosh, what do we do? What do we do? Well, let me tell you, this is what we do. We rethink health. We rethink health. We rethink physical and mental, emotional health, and put it back together again according to the laws of nature. Like nature everything. You don't see cats, well, maybe you do because they're domesticated, but you don't see nature actually putting itself into extinction by the things they do day in and day out that they know are good for them, right? Like we rethink health, we return to nature, to our natural rhythms as a family. All these things that we think are convenient are very inconvenient actually in the end, because then we have emotional dysregulation, we have screaming fights with our children, we have defiance, we have poor skills at in life and school and education, like they're not learning. So I think that to put that attention is actually really amazingly beautiful. It's fun. So let's get away from talking about like thinking about ways to make our lives easier and that this is what we don't want to do. I mean, really and embracing the stuff that makes us human.
So quit drinking the Kool-Aid of what's out there, right?
Yeah.
Chart our own course with our kids. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear that. That is awesome. Well, those are all the questions I have for today.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dori, for this awesome talk and letting me just go hard on this topic I find is just amazingly important. And for all your brilliant questions, I really appreciate the thoughtfulness you put into this challenge again, like that, that you took on for this summit. And so I thank you, Dori, for being an interviewer for the Children's Health Summit 4. And you'll be hearing more from us and from Dori very shortly to everybody who's listening. So, Dori, have a great day.
Very good. Thank you. You too, Carla. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this interview, and be sure to listen to more interviews from this timely and groundbreaking series. If you would like more information, guidance, and support through your family's health journey, and or want to join our growing community of professionally trained family health coaches, please visit us at healthyfamilyformula.com. Together, we can turn the tide for the future health of our children. May you and your families be well.